I will be reading from John chapter 20, verses 19 through 23. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." This is the word of the Lord.
If you're ever walking through the streets of Paris, you might be shocked when you see it. They call it La Passe Morale. You can see it on the screen. It comes from a French novel and a French play. It actually translates "the passer through the walls." It's a bronze statue of a man walking through a wall, but it's more than a statue. It's a reminder of a story. There was a man, a Parisian man, named de Toulouse, who, when he was 43 years old, discovered that he could indeed walk through walls. In search for a cure, he consulted a doctor who prescribed some medicine and exercise. That solves everything, you know, the common cold and the bad case of walking through walls, medicine and exercise. However, when de Toulouse's new boss began to make his life miserable and to make work unbearable, he began to use his ailment to his advantage. And he began to walk through walls and torment his manager, who was eventually taken to an asylum. Then he began to rob banks and jewelry shops, and he became somewhat famous, something of a celebrity in Paris. One day he allowed himself to be caught and put in prison, which of course mattered very little because he would repeatedly escape. And finally, he fell in love with a married woman whom he would visit every night after her husband left and had locked her in her room. One night while he was in her room, he developed a headache, and the woman offered medicine to him. He thought it was aspirin, but in fact, it was the medicine the doctor had recommended many years earlier. As he was leaving that night, he noticed some resistance as he passed through the interior walls. And as he was passing through the outer wall of the property, he noticed that he was not able to move and was trapped in the wall, where he remains to this very day. You don't believe that, do you? I do. I believe that. And so there he is. You can see his left hand. The bronze has been rubbed off his left hand because all the passers-by grab that hand and try to pull him through the wall, and to no avail. I guess walking through walls isn't for everyone. This all reminds me of a poem by Mark Rylance, a contemporary playwright. Here's what he says. "Unlike flying or astral projection, walking through walls is a totally earth-related craft, but a lot more interesting than pot making or driftwood lamps. I got started at a picnic up in Bowstring in the northern part of the state, which I believe is Wisconsin. A fellow walked through a brick wall right there in the park, and I said, 'Say, I want to try that.' Stone walls are best, then brick and wood. Wooden walls with fiberglass insulation and steel doors aren't so good. They won't hurt you. If your wall walking is done properly, both you and the wall are left intact. It's just that they aren't pleasant somehow. The worst things are wire fences. Maybe it's the molecular structure of the alloy or just the amount of give in a fence. I don't know, but I've torn my jacket and lost my hat in a lot of fences. The best approach to a wall is, first, place two hands flat against the surface. It's a matter of concentration and just the right pressure. You'll feel the dry, cool inner wall with your fingers, and then there's a moment of total darkness before you step through to the other side. Unquote. I don't know what your experience tells you of walking through walls, but I'm a bit of a novice at this. I don't know much about it. I don't mean to make light of walls either. Walls are important, I guess. Can you imagine life without walls? We need walls for definition and division. It would be total chaos and confusion if we didn't have any walls. Walls tell us what is my space and what is your space and what is all of our space here together. Walls delineate the purpose of space. They differentiate between bathroom and dining room, which is an important delineation. Walls are important for protection. If we didn't have any walls, we would be vulnerable, exposed to anything and everything. Walls are important for insulation and reclusion, separating us from the world. There's a reason teenagers like to camp out in their bedrooms. Life gets chaotic. I believe there's a tendency in all of us just to retreat to our side of the walls, to our room, to our space. Walls help us make sense of things. They insulate us from the madness. It's no wonder, I guess, the disciples were behind closed doors and thick walls that Sunday evening. In 3 days, their worlds had been turned upside down. They thought Jesus was the Messiah, but Jesus was dead. They thought Jesus would deliver them, but Jesus was dead. They thought the weekend would end in a coronation, but rather it ended in a crucifixion, and Jesus was dead. And now they feared the same end awaited them. And if that wasn't enough, earlier that very day, Mary brought word that Jesus' body was gone, and then that she had seen Jesus alive and well. You know, resurrection is no less disturbing and startling to our paradigms than crucifixion is. By what canons of logic do you make sense of a resurrection? And so they shut themselves in the room and triple locked the doors and tried to make sense of it all. Behind those walls, they thought about their own failures and abandonment, I'm sure. Behind those walls, they sat in silence and spoke in whispers. And even though the locks were on the inside, I'm sure they felt as though that room was something of a prison for them. Actually, John is pretty clear about why they were behind locked doors. John says it was because of fear. They were behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jews. Fear. That primordial reaction that causes us to coil up in a heaping mass of reactivity, striking at anything that gets near us. That paralyzing emotion that draws us up into the fetal position so that we can protect our vital organs and our vital interests and can't do anything creative or new. Fear, that debilitating state that sends us scurrying behind our walls and slamming our doors to keep us in and them out. Fear. That's what it really was for them. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's what it really is for us too. What makes fear so dangerous and debilitating, really, is that it comes in so many different shapes and sizes. For some people, it's fear of failure. They cannot distinguish who they are from what it is they do. Their identity's caught up in their doing, their resume. And therefore they work their fingers to the bone trying to create an identity. They spend their lives trying to please people to the extent that they no longer know who they are. Do you know how exhausting it is to try to live your life pleasing anybody and everybody? A chameleon struggles to know its true colors. For some people, it's fear of death. That great equalizer of all mankind. It doesn't pay attention to any of the particulars of any of us. Death doesn't care. Some people are afraid of death. Of course, the great irony is fearing death doesn't keep you from dying. It keeps you from living. For some people, it's fear of the other, whomever the other happens to be. There are voices from every corner of our culture saying, be afraid of this one, and be afraid of that one, and be very, very afraid of that one over there. For some people, it's fear of mystery, fear of anything unknown, anything that can't be understood, which is why so very many people today only believe in the things that they can understand. And in so doing, they reduce all reality, including their lives, down to the size of their own cerebral cortex. And they lock themselves in the small rooms of what they can understand. And when a grand mystery comes knocking, they lock the doors again and say, you're not welcome here. For some people, it's fear of the future. Ooh. The world is changing at such a rapid pace. Makes you want to retreat behind walls of nostalgia and hang pictures of how things used to be on the wall. Just talk about the past. And our dreams and our visions and our hopes for what could be are dwarfed by our memories of how things used to be, which are more or less true. For some people, it's fear of pain. They have been hurt. They have been hurt by a spouse or a child or a parent or a job or a church, and by God, they will not be hurt again. And so they don't let people in. They don't really want to know anyone or be known by anyone. And in such a spirit, they can't be loved by anyone, and they can't love anyone else at any level of depth. Fear mutates into so many different forms, and it causes us to retreat behind our walls and lock our doors to limit the risk and to manage our vulnerability. The disciples were behind closed doors, and fear was the reason why. And then Jesus walked in. It seems, the way the text reads, with the doors locked and all, that Jesus just walked through the walls and stood right there in their midst. He walked right through it all. Their fear, their pain, their doubt, their failure. He just walked right through. And did you hear what He said to them when He walked in? He actually says it 4 times in these short verses. He walked in and He showed them His wounds, and He said, peace to you. Peace to you. To be sure, this isn't an over-spiritualized peace. Angels didn't sing. Easter lilies didn't sprout from the ground, I'm sure, when He said it. He bore the very real marks of life and death, of pain and suffering. This was no romanticized peace that avoids pain and suffering. It was the miraculous peace that sprouts right in the middle of pain and suffering. He was present with His followers then and there, not in the absence of pain or fear or doubt or confusion, but right smack dab in the middle of it all. He gave them His peace. And brothers and sisters, there are not enough locks on the door, or bullets in the gun, or psychologists in the counseling center, or soldiers in the army, or stocks in the portfolio to achieve that kind of peace. Because it is not a peace that we achieve. It is a peace that we can only receive. And He didn't just give them peace, He gave them power too. Did you hear that? It says that Jesus breathed on them and said, as the Father has sent me, so send I you. He breathed on them. It sort of reminds you of God in the Garden of Eden, who takes those mounds of dirt and breathes in them, and then they become living human beings, Adam and Eve. Here, Jesus breathes into the life of these poor people who had locked themselves behind closed doors. He breathes into their fear and their failure. He breathes into their doubts and their death. He breathed on them with the same breath which animated His body that first Easter Sunday. And that motley crew of folks, with that newfound breath of life in their lungs, followed Jesus right out of that room, right out of those walls, and they would never be the same again. In fact, you might not believe this, but before it was all said and done, those folks walked through some walls too. For the last couple of millennia, the people who follow Jesus have been walking through walls. And Lord knows we don't lack for walls in our day. Sometimes the walls have to do with religion. Religion and religionists are quite adept at building walls. Jews on this side of the wall, Christians on this side of the wall, Muslims on that side of the wall, stained glass windows to divide you. But what do stained glass windows mean to a man who walks through walls? A few years ago, I heard of a missionary in China who was under house arrest because of the communist regime there, and they agreed to release him if only he promised to go home, which he did. So he contacted the missionary society, who wired some money and set him off on his way home. But on his way home, he stopped in India around Christmas time. And there in India, he heard of some Jewish people who were living in the lofts of barns in India, having a very rough go of it. And so this missionary on his way home stops and goes to visit these Jewish people in the lofts of the barns. And he says, "Hey, what would you like for Christmas?" They said, "Hey, buddy, we're Jews. We don't celebrate Christmas." He said, I know. But if someone got you something for Christmas, what would you like?" And they said, "I don't know. We sort of miss the German pastries." He said, And so he took his money and he went into town and he bought German pastries for those Jews that were living in the lofts of the barns. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. The missionary made it home and he told the missionary society, he told a group of seminarians what he had done, and there was one student in the front row incensed. There's always a student in the front row incensed. Why would you do such a thing? They don't believe in Jesus. They're not Christians. They don't celebrate Christmas. And he said, "But I do. I do." You see, he walked through walls. For some people, it's race. Jews on this side of the wall, Gentiles on this side of the wall. We've got a white church on this street corner, and we've got a black church on this street corner, and we've got a Hispanic church somewhere over there. No. He's out of the tomb and he walks through walls. Sometimes it's ideology. Liberals on this side of the wall, conservatives on that side of the wall. Republicans with their elephant over here, and Democrats with their donkey over there. Never the twain shall meet. No. What is ideology to a man who walks through walls? Everybody's chin's on the ground. Sometimes it's nationality. Americans over on this side of the wall. African nations on this side of the wall. Asian nations. Everybody on your side of the wall. No. What is a border to a man who walks through walls? Sometimes it's class. Rich on this side of the wall. Poor on this side of the wall. Well-educated, graduate degrees over here. High school diplomas or their equivalent over here. No. What is social mobility to a man who walks through walls? I guess walls are about as prohibitive for Jesus as tombs are. Over and over and over again, we try to pin him up, categorize him, entomb him in some walls. We seal him up to lock him in. We lock our doors to keep him out and us in. And over again, he walks out of the tomb, and over again, he walks through the walls. No wonder Several of the resurrection accounts say there was something like a great earthquake. I think I know why. When Jesus was raised from the dead, all the walls came crumbling down. The Apostle Paul, in several places, says it this way: in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Brothers and sisters, this is no tribal religion. This is no nationalistic agenda. This is no elitist faith or sectarian dogma. This is about our cosmic Lord who breaks out of tombs and walks through walls. And here's the thing. We don't just gather in this room today to remember that in the distant past. Nor do we gather in this place to pat Jesus on the back and say, boy, we appreciate that about you. That's not it. We gather in this place today to see His wounds one more time and to hear Him say, peace be with you. We gather not to insulate ourselves from the world, but to go out with His peace and His power out into the world. We gather in here today to let Him breathe over us again so that we can inhale whatever it was that He exhaled. We gather not to exclude those out there. What good does it do to exclude when we follow a man who walks through walls? We gather not to seclude ourselves in here in fear, but to believe in the one who walks out of tombs and walks through walls, and to believe Him enough to actually follow Him. And if you follow Him long enough and hard enough, eventually He will lead you out of some tombs and through some walls. Y'all, I don't understand it. I don't understand this wall walking any more than I understand resurrection. And I'm tempted to fall over laughing at the hilarity of it all, were it not for the simple fact that I've seen it. And you've seen it. I don't know exactly how it's done, but I bet it goes something like this. You take both of your hands and you place them flat against the wall. And you listen while He says peace to you. And to you. And to you. And to you. Peace to you. And as the Father has sent me, so send I you. And you breathe in deeply. You breathe in whatever it is He's breathing out. And you'll feel the cool inner wall on your fingertips. And there will be a moment of sheer darkness until you step through on the other side. But you know what's on the other side, don't you? What's on the other side of the wall? You know what's over there. We call that the kingdom of God. And it's a place where there are no tombs. And it's a place where there are no walls. Because they wouldn't be of any use anyway. As the Father has sent me, so send I you. Let's pray. We've heard this story before, O Lord. None of us are surprised. We knew this is the way the story goes. And yet we walk out of this place today in a world of walls. Have your way with us, O God. Grant us your peace and help us to receive it. Grant us your power as we breathe it in and out of our very lungs. And grant us the courage to walk through walls. We pray this in the name of Jesus, the wall walker. Amen.